So, hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Off the Shelf. I am so very excited. I'm gonna be real. I'm so fucking excited about this series. So,
The greater the
I
excitement, the greater the disappointment.
my God, don't say that. Don't make me think that. Hold on. So, the beginning after the end, which you know what, this one's an interesting one for me because I had seen this has been published for a while in English, like 3 or 4 volumes are out. The web comic is currently on hiatus, right? It's on a seasonal break around chapter 180. And they're doing like background chapters and stuff while we wait for the next season to gear up. But it is a very long series. Like it's very long, and it is not all fully adapted and translated. And I'm gonna be honest. I looked at the cover image of this book pop up on my read this if you like solo leveling, right? Like probably 50 times, and just went, ugh, that looks not good. Just looking at the cover image. And I basically refused to read it until about, I want to say, three months ago or so. And then I started reading it, and I went on a fucking binge, caught up to chapter 180 something in a single day, and sobbed my eyes out over this story. So I love this story, and I think it's great. And I'm willing to fight for that in some ways. So this is one where this dude is born into the body of a baby, but he's not born into like his own body. Again, it is fully an isekai. Like he's just born into someone else's body, and then grows up, obviously. And I had us go through most of the early years and up to chapter 39, which is the reunion before the auction house arc starts. So, how did you feel about it?
I like what this series promises, but it feels like... Because I do like a lot of what they introduced. I like a lot of the characters. A lot of the elements here I'm enjoying well enough. The problem for me, I think, right now, is I don't know what this series is. Is this school life? Is it adventure? It feels like he jumps between status quos extremely quickly. I've never gotten a good settled feeling on what direction we're really going here with what we've read, at least.
Yeah. Well, what I will say from that is this series has some pretty firm overarching arcs. Like, for example, right now we literally read the book that was titled The Early Years, right? So it's all about his childhood. And then the next book is about him as like a young teen in school and so on. I will tell you now that this is absolutely an end of the world savior story in the end. Like this is gonna be big, epic, big fights.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I can't say I dislike it. It's just like I never really felt like I got settled into a place. Like I thought it was going to be we were going to settle in one place and really invest ourselves in a cast of characters at one point,
mm-hmm.
and then it goes a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get another cast of characters, and just when he's getting settled with that cast of characters, at the end of it, we actually read past the end of a season. I'm surprised we didn't stop there. He immediately leaves and goes into another cast of characters that we're now getting indication that he's going to leave again, even if only for a short... I don't know how long, or if he's coming back consistently.
Well, let's talk it out a little bit, because like obviously we don't care about spoilers. That's the point of these. But so we started with him and his parents, and the adventures that his parents worked with, right? He got flung out, and then he ends up with the dragon. Yeah?
Yep.
After he leaves the dragon, he ends up with the elves in the Elven Kingdom. The girl and her grandfather and the parents. And just as we're ending this submission, he gets ported back to his parents in the capital.
Yeah, there was a bit of a time skip there.
Yeah. Yeah, there was. But yeah, so that's why I didn't have us end at the end of the season, right? Because I knew that he was going to get ported back to his parents, and then some other stuff was going to happen. So I actually had us end right before what I thought was People need
I
to
heard
stop
a beep.
messaging me. Yeah, that was somebody messaging me somewhere. I don't know. Right now I've got like 3 emails and a messenger open in the background, so it could have been from anywhere. But yeah. So, this is reminding me I have a quiz due tomorrow night.
Fun.
That I haven't taken yet. But yeah, so he bounces around a bit. But he starts with his parents and he does come back to his parents at the end of all that. You know?
Yeah.
So it's not a completely separate cast. We get introduced to some new characters when he comes back to his parents. But it's still his parents, which is where we spent like the first 10 chapters.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just all the bouncing around makes us feel like... It feels like they adapted a D&D character's backstory. If that makes sense. Like, we're not actually into the proper story. I'm reading the character sheet.
I'm going to be honest. I don't know if this is the author's intent, but to me, Book 1, The Early Years, does feel like that. Like, Book 1, The Early Years feels like someone telling you a summation of everything that has happened up to the point where the rest of the plot begins, which is the episode after I've stopped you, essentially.
Yeah, I think it's the lack of, like, a firm, graspable structure that's really throwing me through a loop here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a series of events, and the events are well done, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, it almost feels like I'm going through entire... Forgive me, because I have a similar critique of fairy tales overarching story. It feels like I'm going from arc to arc on fairy tale, except I'm doing it within, like, 4 or 5 chapters.
You're not entirely wrong. I think the pacing of the early years has a bit to be desired, in my opinion, because I do feel like it kind of... There are... It skips daily life training arcs, is what it does. It only shows us the big events happening and the people he meets and, like, a little bit of their interactions just so you understand their interaction. And it really just shows you the big events without what's the equivalent of training arcs for this character. Does that make sense? Like, you're skipping out on, like, the day-to-day boring shit after they've explained how it goes once. They don't show it to you another 300 times. Which is, I think, good and bad. It does make the story feel a little choppy. Like, you're jumping around a little bit. You're having time skips, a couple months here, a couple years there, you know, going from place to place. But at the same time, I don't think I would have enjoyed seeing some of that stuff more drawn out, because this, like, the main story commences when he's, like, significantly older than when we start the story. And if they had really buckled down and gone into, like, excruciating detail about that entire period of him growing up, I would not have been very abused.
Agree with you. It would have felt a little bit either slow or derivative if we had gone through and fleshed a lot of the stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm actually going to, like, the way I'm going to default to, and this is either going to make you happy or mad, I think Natsu did it better in Fairy Tail. Because, like, Natsu's got, like, 2 or 3 different, like, things going on in his backstory that are important to his characterization, and they're all told in flashbacks when they're going to be relevant, or just before they're relevant, or you're given it while his character is going through a more cohesive arc, and it works in that regard. I have my problems with Fairy Tail. Natsu's backstory is surprisingly not one of them.
I'm going to be honest, I don't think that the way they did Natsu's backstory would have worked for this character. Having read further in and knowing how the story goes, like, from here and what's happening, I don't think they would have found a good place to shove in these flashbacks.
Maybe, but now it just feels like we're putting way too much backstory here for when even 1 or 2 of these events mid-childhood would have honestly sufficed for a backstory.
Well, think about this. I seriously considered starting you after the early years.
I can see why.
Yeah. Because the
hard
early
to call.
Years, it's a different pacing than any of the rest of the story. And it covers such a large span of his life. Like the next couple books only cover like a couple of years. There's one more time skip, but beyond that other time skip, they only cover like a little bit of time each. And everything gets a lot more condensed. He stays in one place more often, because he's kind of things settle slightly once he's a little bit older. And the early, like, it's even titled The Early Years, like it's some sort of prequel or something. So it was very tempting to just have you skip the early years entirely and start later. Because honestly, I think you could have, and then just read the chapters from the early years at, like, periodic intervals. But that's not how they did it. And
Yeah.
I didn't want to try to figure out how to get those all in the correct sort of order and organization. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like, I didn't have confidence in my ability to make it seem like flashback chapters.
Yeah, no, I understand why you didn't do that. But yeah, I think, like I said, it just didn't feel like we'd actually started the story by the end.
That's
just
fair.
Not on a this isn't the story on a pacing level. Like, nothing is being, like, we're still kind of fleshing out this guy's early life here.
Yeah, well, I mean, technically, with one small, almost unnoticeable single chapter example, we haven't started the story. Like, we just haven't.
If the story's only been one chapter so far, has it really started?
Because I'm going to be honest, the only thing from the early years that was really important for us to remember, right, is his interaction with the dragon,
mm-hmm.
and that he met the elven princess and the king and the grandfather. Like, that's really all that you need from the early years going into the next couple of volumes. Like, I know that sounds terrible because the rest of it's really just unnecessary, but I think that's true in my opinion. But I kind of like the unnecessary stuff because at least it's there. Like, I'm getting to see him interacting with people, and there's one thing that's built up in the early years that becomes an incredible emotional investment down the line. So like the emotional payout from being able to read from the early years to the later chapters,
I mean,
is unreal.
So. Like I said, none of this was badly written. None of it was. It's entirely all of my critique here comes down to pacing and story structure.
Well, that's the other thing. So, the author, the author of The Beginning After the End, Turtle Me, right? He's a Berkeley graduate who was supposed to apparently go into, like, corporate business or something, and just hard pivoted into writing after graduation.
Good for him.
Yeah.
I can appreciate that.
Yeah. But he's really invested in sort of the story and in the writing. And I think right now there are like 6 or 7 volumes released. Each volume, I think, the way that he has them laid out, each volume that gets released is meant to be sort of a, like, overarching saga of its own, which is why they all kind of have, like, interesting names. Because if you look at the names of his books, it'll be like The Early Years, Transcendence, The Return, and so on. So it almost has a similar story structure to, like, a traditional published series of just novels, but it's a webcomic. In that each book is meant to just sit sort of separately and be a part of the story. Not just, this book contains these chapters, which are part of whatever arc fit into these chapters.
The early years, like, that book ends when we saw, like, at the end of season 1 there.
I might have fucked up with that. I can't remember if I did or did. All right, hold on.
Because you had me read just a little bit past where it says end of season 1.
Yeah. I don't think the seasons, I don't think, correspond with the books. Because right now there are 10 volumes released. Okay. Volumes and chapters. All right. So yeah, no. I actually had you stop before before. Yeah. No. Yeah. No. I had you stop at the right time. But it. What? What the fuck? Hold on. These are. Okay. Okay. So I had you read the first one, which is The Early Years, Volume 1. And that is. Tapa says it's episodes 1 through 55, but when I look at the chapter count, it says chapters 1 through 21, and volume 2 starts with royalty and the auction. And I cut you off before the auction house. So I think I did cut you off correctly for The Early Years. And then the second book is called New Heights. And we'll go to it. And then the third, Beckoning Fates. Horizon's Edge.
Is there like an actual event with the auction house, or is it when he arrived? It's not like he should have arrived with his family and met the people there, right?
Yeah. There is an actual event at the auction house because the first chapter is royalty, and then it's auction. And there's an event that happens at the auction house specifically. Yeah. I cut you off correctly. Okay. I did give you The Early Years. And then the next chunk that we will read will be New Heights. But like I said, it goes up like volume 5 is called Convergence, and then Transcendence, and then Divergence. Man, it's starting to sound like a YA series.
Yeah, this is a YA series.
Amongst the Fallen. But yeah. So I cut you off at the right place. I think I just had to balance like the different chapter counts and the ways that it was published, because I think it was originally published as a Tapas original and the chapters were shorter when it was published as a Tapas original, and then they were readapted when it got published as an official comic. But something like that, I had you at the right point. Enough said. You read The Early Years.
Yeah.
So I do think that The Early Years is the only book that skips around this much. As far as I remember, the rest are more steady. But I do also just think it was necessary. So I mean, that's what I have to say on the beginning after the end. Mm-hmm. I like Arthur. He's nice.
Yeah.
He's got trauma. Lots of it. So I guess we'll be back next time to talk about another new book, or an old book, or a repeat book. I don't know. We'll see. Like, comment, subscribe.